TikTok might be going away, but she's here to stay.
Hello, guys, gals, and otherworldly pals. Today we're going to be talking about the Egyptian creation myths. But first, as always, we're going to be talking about some history. Now, it was believed that writing was first invented in Egypt around 3250 BC. It's believed that it started as a way to organize the distribution and storage of goods, which is always a really good reason to start writing. Now, a fun fact around this time, other independent writing systems were emerging around the world, but it's believed that Egyptian and Sumerian are the oldest that we currently know. Now, this writing system was called hieroglyphs, which means sacred carving. And surprise, surprise, I know this is going to come as a shocker, they were mostly carved into stone and mostly used in temples and tombs and other monuments for nearly 3,000 years. Now, after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, Greek became the primary language, but hieroglyphs were still used in important decrees by the priests, and of course, in temples and tombs, it's kind of a given. Now, as time went on, and with the death of the last pharaoh, the great, the powerful, the beautiful Cleopatra, Egypt went into a period of it being passed from one foreign leader to another, like the weirdest game of hot potato ever. And this went on until Christianity began to rise, and eventually the temples were all closed and the old faith was abandoned. And the last known inscription came from a priest at the Philae Temple in the year 394. And after that, unfortunately, the ability to read ancient Egyptian just vanished. No one had a use for it anymore, so no one needed to read it anymore, sadly. Now, in 1799, the Rosetta Stone was discovered. Yeah, this is where we get that from. This is the real OG Rosetta Stone. Now, on it was three distinct languages. It had hieroglyphics, Demotic, or the common written language of the ancient Egyptians, and Greek. And over the course of several years, many used this as the building block to decipher and understand what was written. And it wasn't until 1822 when, now this is a very French name and I'm going to ruin it, but I'm going to do my best, is Jean Francois Champollion. And he published his notes on the translation of these hieroglyphics. And that's when we began to decipher this beautiful ancient language. And the continued study of hieroglyphics since has continued to grow and elevate our understanding of this ancient and beautiful language and culture. Now, even with a lot of these discoveries and the more that we're learning and understanding, there's still a lot that we don't know. Like the ancient Egyptians really took the phrase, leave confusing diaries, and ran with it. So just keep that in mind. We're still learning more and more every day. Now, I normally probably say that that's enough history and it's time to get on to the juicy mythology, but I'm going to be a buzzkill here and say that that's not the case because a lot of the Egyptian myths are deeply tied to its history and the world around them. And over time, as things changed, as all things do with time, it created layered and sometimes contradictory tales that existed both simultaneously without conflict at all, which I know is weird, but it's also really cool. So, we will be talking about three. Yep, that's right. Not one, not two, but three different creation myths of the ancient Egyptian world, in which they believed it had both a linear and a circle. There's another word for it, but I literally cannot say it, so we're going to go with circle time. Now, to break that down in a way that makes sense, we mortals, we mere mortals live a linear life, meaning we are born, we live, then we die. Depressing, I know. But the world of the gods and the cosmos lived in this circle time, which was a constant circle of death, decay, and rebirth. Fun fact, the famous image of the Ouroboros, you know, that really cool snake that's always eating its tail, that's always in every creepy, like, mind blowing mystery movie. Yeah, that began in Egypt. Now, as always, before we really get into things, a quick disclaimer. There are going to be words and names in this that I don't know the correct pronunciation for, or I might trip and stumble over the word and say it incorrectly. And for that, I just want to apologize. I will try my best to get it all correct. But thank you for all your understanding and patience with me as we go through this journey together. And now for some even more clarification. I know you guys just love it when I do this. Before we jump into it, oftentimes in Egyptian mythology, the same god can transform into another god. This could have come about to show that all things have a beginning, middle, and end, but also to show the many different jobs that needed to be carried out. For example, the original sun god Atum, who transformed into the god Ra, who later retired and led the sun across the sky through the world and the afterworld to be reborn again at dawn. And later into Horus, who took over the throne of the gods and became the next sun god after Ra had been retired and his father Osiris was murdered by his brother Set. But that's a whole nother deep dive story. We're just using it as an example for right now to show that there are many different sun gods, but it was all like transitioning into different aspects of the sun and what it represented to Egyptian culture at that time. Now we are going to start in Hermiopolis. That is a really strange word. I dare anyone to try to say it 3 times fast without tripping over themselves. But, anyways, this city was sacred to the god Thoth, who was the god of wisdom. It was also known as, and I might butcher this word, so please forgive me, but it was known as Kahumunu? Um, and basically, the meaning of this name was the city of eight. The name was changed because the Greeks equated Thoth to the Greek god Hermes and changed the name. And they had their very own version of creation that will have clear connections to its ancient name. Now, everybody sit back, get comfortable, drink your tea or coffee or water. Yeah, I'm looking at you. And I want you all to close your eyes and come on this journey with me. Now, in the beginning, there was nothing but a vast, chaotic, primordial ocean. And within these waters lay 8 beings waiting for the creation of the world. And there was 4 frog-headed males and 4 serpent-headed females. That's right, you heard me right. 4 frog-headed, 4 serpent-headed. They were called the Ogdoad. The Ogdode. I'm probably saying that wrong. I apologize, but we're going to move on. Or group of 8. And they represented the dark, watery, unknown, internal state of the cosmos. There was Nun and Nunet for the water, he and he her for the infinity of the world, kek and koket for the darkness without the sun, and amun and amunet for the concept of hiddenness. Now, after an unknown amount of time, they never really give us a time frame within these stories, but after an unknown amount of time, a primordial mound rose from these waters and a cosmic egg came into being. Now, there are different versions of how this egg came to be. Some say it came from the eight beings, others that a goose called the Great Cackler laid the egg. By the way, that's a really great name, the Great Cackler. Okay, now that I'm done trying to sound like the Wicked Witch of the West, moving on. In other tales, an ibis, which is a bird associated with the god of Thoth, is responsible for the egg, and from this egg came the newborn sun god. Now, in another version, a lotus blossom grew on the mound, and when it bloomed, out of it came a scarab beetle. But this scarab beetle, it transformed into the newborn sun god, who cried, and his tears turned into the first of mankind. Now, that is the end of that particular creation myth. And so, with that, we're going to jump over to the ancient city of Heliopolis. It was one of the oldest cities of ancient Egypt and was a major religious center. And it was occupied since prehistoric Egypt, and it was greatly expanded under the Old and Middle Kingdom. Now, this city, just like every other city known to the history of mankind, went through a couple different name changes. We're not going to go through all of them because there's quite a bit, and a lot of them I would never be able to pronounce in 100 years. Now, the original name for this city, we have no actual pronunciation of it, but it's spelled IWNW. But the meaning of it was the pillars, and that's because Heliopolis was known for a lot of the pillars that were built here and then later grave robbed essentially by multiple different countries and sent around the world. I highly suggest getting on Google sometime and looking them up because they are really, really cool. But I didn't want to take up this whole video just talking about all these different obelisks. Another one of its ancient names that I wanted to bring up, I didn't actually grab the name itself because I knew I wouldn't be able to pronounce it, but in the Old Kingdom pyramid texts, the city was also called the House of Ra. Now that just sounds like spine tingly cool. Like you're going to the House of Ra, you better be on your like absolute best behavior. But this actually makes a lot of sense because the principal cults of Ra and Atum, who were both sun gods, as we have already established, were here in this city. But that's also how we got the Greek name Heliopolis, meaning the city of the sun. From the Greeks, yet again, identifying Ra and Atum, who were, again, sun gods, with Helios, which was one of the Greeks' gods of sun. They also had several different sun gods, but their mythology wasn't as focused on sun worship as the Egyptian one was, but that's not really important right now. I'm just kind of going on a ramble, so don't mind me. Now, this city has a long history connected with a lot of famous people from history that I'm sure any history buff or really anybody who has even stuck their pinky toe into history, even prehistoric ancient history, would recognize. But we're not really going to get into all of that in this video. I would highly suggest maybe looking it up on your own if you're curious, but yeah, it's super cool, but yet again, we're not going to really get into it all that much. I just wanted to bring it up to be like this city was like such a major spot for so long that a lot of famous people came to. Now, after about 2.5 millennia, the city was left abandoned. And just for clarification, because I had to look this up myself, but just to make sure that we all understand, a millennia is a period of 1,000 years. So this town was a pop in place for almost like 3,000 years, which is super long. It's like a crazy long time. And to really understand how old this city was and just Egypt in general, the United States is only 248 years old as of recording this video, which isn't that old. I mean, it feels old to us, but it's not really that old. I mean, the Roman Empire was only around for 503 years when it finally fell. Now, ancient Egypt itself was well over 3,000 years old, and it continued for another 275 years under the Ptolemaic dynasty until 30 BC when it fell and was annexed by Rome. That is an astronomically large amount of time for not just a city, but an entire country and culture to live and thrive. Most nations nowadays don't even have that long of a history. It's just beautiful and mind boggling and fantastic. Now, moving on from my rambles and just gushing about how fantastic I think this is because it's so old, we're gonna jump into another city before we start talking about our next myth. And that city is Memphis. And no, folks, I'm not talking about Memphis, Tennessee. That city is actually named after the Memphis of Egypt. Fun fact, it's named after an Egyptian city. The more you know. Now, this Memphis was the capital city of ancient Egypt during both the early dynasty and Old Kingdom, and it remained a very important city throughout ancient Egyptian history. It was a place at the mouth of the Nile Delta, and during its golden age, it thrived as a regional center for commerce, trade, and religion. The history of this great city was really closely linked to that of the country, and it's believed that its downfall was due to its economic significance in the later antiquity following the rise of the city of Alexandria. And unfortunately, just like so many of the great, wonderful, beautiful things of the ancient past, its final death toll came to the city in the year of 380 AD with the Edict of, I'm going to try to say this, and I hope I get it right, Thessalonica, which made Nicene Christianity the sole religion of the Roman Empire. And so Memphis, that was really holding on to its religious significance, was lost with the ancient religion of its ancestors being abandoned. Dang it, Christianity ruining so many things for us again. Stop messing with all the cool things of the past, okay? Just let us have our fun. Dang it. So mean. Moving on from yet another one of my rants. It's so fun to rant, but that's not the point. It's not the point. We're going to be doing something a little different for the next two myths because they are basically the same except for who exactly started it all. And that's mainly due to the fact that each of these cities being the primary places of worship for either Atum and Ra in Heliopolis or Ta in Memphis. So instead of telling the same story twice, we are just going to do the Memphis beginning and go from there. Because since they're the same myth, it really just makes more sense. And Yeah, that just seems like the fair way to do it. That way you guys don't have to listen to the same thing twice over with just a different beginning. Now sit back, relax, think of good thoughts, get that bubble bath going, grab that blanket, that comfortable thingy to cuddle. I don't know, whatever you do for relaxation. And we're going to get into our next juicy creation myth. Okay, that last part sounded kind of creepy, I will admit that, but we're jumping into it now. In the beginning, there was just the vast primordial chaos, or the god Nu, who was the personification of those watery abysses. Within those chaotic waters lay the great craftsman, Ta'a, or Ta? Ta'a. We're going to go with Ta'a, who, with his powerful thoughts and conscious will, spoke the primordial mound into rising from the waters. Really gives a whole new meaning to being careful with your words, huh? Now, the mound was called the Benben, and it was shaped like a pyramid. And fun fact, the pyramid toppers on the top of the pyramids, like the one at Giza, are also called Benben, representing the first primordial mound. Some say Atum was the Benben. Others say he rose out of it, and others circle back to a lotus being in the Benben and blooming to show Atum. But once he had been born, he cried tears of joy upon bringing light and creation to the world at last. And as these tears fell onto the Benben, they turned into the first humans. Yeah, that's right, guys. We're going to circle right back to this. And at this time, we aren't tree folks like in the Norse reality, but salty eye water given form. Yeah, let that keep you up until 3 a.m. Now, once Atum dried his eyes, blew his nose, and got over his great big achievement of being born, he decided it was time to create his children. Now, he either did this by A, he spat them out, B, he spat and sneezed them out, or C, he used his bodily fluids. Yeah, I'll let you do the math and choose the one that helps you sleep at night. And be thankful we got cried out and there's no giants being ripped apart to create the world around us, Jeffrey Dahmer style. So yeah, we're just gonna move on to the next part of this tale. Now, these children were Shu, the god of light, peace, lions, air, and wind. He was seen as a cooling, calming, peaceful influence representing the air between the earth and the sky. There was also his sister wife, Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. She was also one of the goddesses who could function as the Eye of Ra. And one of these days, we're going to explore all the different stories around all the different goddesses who represent the Eye of Ra. So look forward to that. Now, they later also had two children, Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky, stars, cosmos, mothers, astronomy, and the universe. Now, Ra, who's the god of the sun at the time, took over ruling the world after Atum decided to retire. And he decided to make a decree that Nut shall not give birth on any day of the year. So she decided that she was going to go to the biggest thug that she knew, Thoth, and she spoke to him about it. And he came up with a devious plan. He went to gamble with Khonsu, the god of the moon. Now, at this time, his light rivaled that of Ra's. So every time he lost, he had to give up a piece of his light to Newt. And at this time, there was only 360 days of the year. And so he lost 5 days worth of light. I mean, personally, I wouldn't gamble with the god of wisdom because it sounds like you're just trying to lose, but that's just me. And this was honestly a really good plan. And within those 5 days, Nut and Geb had 5 children. Osiris, later ruler of the gods, and then god of the dead. Horus, the elder, god of war, not to be confused with Horus the younger. Yeah, it's a thing. Don't think too deeply about it right now. That's a story for another time. And Set, god of discord and the desert. Isis, goddess of magic. And Nephthys, goddess of water. Now, of course, when Ra found out that he got played like a sucker, he was pissed. So he had his son Shu rip his children apart and stand between them for all of eternity, creating the distance between the earth and the sky. And Newt, just being the fantastic mama that she is, she never regretted her decision. Now, with these 5 children born, the Ennead was finally complete. Now, the story does continue into other tales about these 5 children and Ra and other elements, but we're going to save those for another day. As far as the ancient Egyptians knew, the world had been created and all the important elements of life were born. Now, with all that I have said and all the stories that I've told, Egyptian mythology and its history is really as vast and chaotic as the primordial waters that it was birthed from. And if you would like to know more or dip deeper into this rich and cultured society, I always advise doing your own research. You never know what you might find, but if you're looking forward to hearing me tell you these tales, I will be getting to all of them eventually. For right now, we are focusing on the creation myths of the major mythologies that we will be talking about. But for now, that's the end of our tale. Remember to always speak carefully. Your bodily fluids might make people, and leave less confusing diaries for future generations. Ta ta!
Now go to bed.